Who wants to ask the first question? Over here. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Trace. I'm from Holy Cross College, and I just wanted to ask, what do you think we can do as a community to help people love the church like we do?
That's a really good question, and of course what I was saying earlier on was all the reasons why people don't love the church. So I think we've got to think about those things and show that there's another face to the church. And the question you've asked, I think, isn't just a question for people like me, it's a question for all of us. I could go on for hours and hours about this, but I think one of the things that impresses people about any organisation, and therefore also the church, is when what we say is matched by what we do, you know? So here we are today talking about LifeLink and about how important it is to reach out to people in need and try and see them with fresh eyes so that we're not critical of them or condemning of them or anything like that. I think that's perhaps the thing that any of us can do in our own situation, and, you know, Holy Cross out at Ellenbrook can think about how we do it in our local scene. How do we make our school community a place where all the ideals that Christians talk about are actually seen in action? Now that's a kind of a general answer, I know, but I think it has to be a general answer really, because it has to be worked out at the local level. So you're the people who know what the issues are in Ellenbrook, what the reality of people in need actually looks like on the ground. And then in terms of LifeLink, which is partly about raising money, but it's also partly about reaching out and helping people, you can say, well, in our situation, we could do this. Or we can recognise that in the area of Perth where we're living, the particular issues are 1, 2 and 3. So as a school community, can we sit down and work out how we might respond to that? But I think, pardon me, I'm losing my voice. I just said to Bishop Don, I've got good news and bad news. The bad news is I'm losing my voice, so you'll have to answer all the questions. And the good news is I'm losing my voice, so you'll have to answer all the questions. But anyway, I've answered the first one. But that's what I would say first of all. People hate hypocrisy. You know, they really do. And so one of the things the church gets criticised for all the time is that we have all of these beautiful ideas and high ideals and all of that sort of stuff, and we just don't live up to them. And that's why people don't love the church. And the way to help people love the church is to show that there are people in the church who are doing their best to live up to the ideal. So you might want to follow that up with a more specific question, but Bishop Don might want to say something about that too.
The thing that I find very life-giving when I go around parishes is to see, and schools, is to see the numbers of really enthusiastic people who get involved, and they do all sorts of different things. But their motivation is because they want to serve other people. They want to achieve the best possible outcomes for other people, and in that way to show respect for every person that they encounter. And to me, that's the sort of thing that encourages, and it's something that shows, I think, that the Spirit of Jesus living in us is very strong, can enable us to do extraordinary things. And I hope this bird is going to do not something on my head, but those good things that we see being done by people who see themselves as part of the church, I think they're the things that give me great sense of encouragement, and helps me, I think, to focus on that larger picture of what the Lord is doing in our society through us, doing some really great things. So I guess that's what I'd want to add to that. Yeah.
Over here, yes.
How long have you both been bishops for?
You can go first. You've been a bishop longer than I have.
I became a bishop, I think, before any of you were born, except the teachers, that is. In 2002, I was ordained a bishop, and so that means, 16 years? And I think the Archbishop, I'll answer for him. So he was ordained a bishop in 2007, and he was ordained, as I was, to be an auxiliary bishop. So he was auxiliary bishop in Melbourne, and I'm still an auxiliary bishop here and enjoying it. He became Archbishop, he got a lot more to do, and I'm there helping him, but I enjoy that role of being the one who sort of assists. So I've been in this role all those years, and the Archbishop came to Perth in 2012 as Archbishop. So, and we've been blessed to have him with us. Good.
And someone told me yesterday that today is actually the anniversary of the big ceremony in the cathedral where I was made the Archbishop. So there you go, 6 years ago. You might be interested, I won't go on about it, but you just might be interested to know how, I don't know about Bishop Don, but how I found out I was going to be a bishop. I used to teach theology in Melbourne, and I'd finished teaching for the day, and I'd gone home and I'd got changed, and I was heading out to the school where I used to, you saw the photo of it before, the school where I used to be a teacher and where I used to be the rector of the college, but I was then, the time I'm talking about now, I was the chair of the school board, so I was going out there for a meeting, and I got there a bit early, and the school that you saw on the screen is near one of those great big shopping centres, a bit like Garden City or the Carousel or one of those sort of places. So I thought I'll whip down there and grab a cup of coffee before the meeting starts. So I went down, and as I was walking through the shopping centre to the food court, I was checking my phone. I hadn't had a chance to look at my phone all day. I was checking my phone, and I saw there was a message that had come through about 10 o'clock in the morning. This was about 4:45 at night. 10 o'clock in the morning. This is all in Melbourne. So you dial 321, you get your messages retrieved, and there was this voice saying, Father Costello, it's the Apostolic Nuncio, that's the Pope's representative, the Apostolic Nuncio ringing from Canberra. Can you please give me a ring when you get this message? And my first thought was, what have I done wrong? Because you never get a message from the Nuncio unless you've done something wrong. So I was a bit nervous. Anyway, I rang through and they put me through to the Nuncio, and he said, oh, Father, I've got some news for you. And I said, oh, okay. And he said, Pope Benedict has appointed you as an auxiliary bishop in Melbourne. Not Pope Benedict would like to ask you if you'd be an auxiliary bishop in Melbourne, or Pope Benedict is thinking this might be a good idea, just Pope Benedict has appointed you. And it had never in a million years occurred to me that I might become a bishop. So I was, you'll find this very hard to believe, but I was actually speechless. So I didn't say anything. So there's this dead silence. And then the nuncio says, Father, are you still there? And I said, yes. And he said, because he could tell that I was a bit concerned, he said, look, you can say no, but the Pope is certainly hoping that you will say yes. That's what you call pressure. So anyway, I said yes, and that's how it all happened. So yes, be careful when you answer the phone, because you never know what's going to come next. I think there was a question down here somewhere, was there? Oh, over here.
Hi, my name's Scott Hunter from Ursula Frayne, and it's a bit of a controversial question, but why is the Church opposed to non-traditional methods of pregnancy?
Say that again, I didn't quite catch it.
Sorry. Why is the Church opposed to non-traditional methods of pregnancy?
You mean like IVF and that sort of stuff, or surrogacy, all of those sort of things?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Bishop Don, why is the Church opposed to...
I've just lost my voice.
Look, it's a really good question, and it's a complicated question, and I don't want to take up the whole time answering it. But you might have noticed in my talk that I talked about the fact, you know that quote I put up about adapting yourself no longer, and I said there's this kind of secular meaning and the religious meaning. And I said the difference between the secular meaning and the religious meaning is that this religious meaning starts with the idea that God actually created the world, and that the God's plan, if you like, for the world is sort of built into the way God created the world. And so this is partly what we, in our Catholic tradition, we kind of call the natural law, that if you look at the way nature is structured and the way human beings are structured, you can get an understanding of God's intention, pardon me, when he created the world. And so, we don't want to go into all of the too graphic details because these are very personal kinds of issues. But in God's creative intention, as far as the church can understand it, it's his desire that children are conceived and born within the natural methods, if you like, or the natural structures that God's created. And that is basically through a man and a woman, hopefully by getting married and starting a family. That's where they create, together with God, a new life. And so the church wants to say yes to this basic idea that a child, ideally, is born through the natural love of his mum and dad who express that love through their sexuality, and it's out of that whole beautiful reality that children appear. So that's the basic yes, and because of that yes, the church is not so keen on things that seem to try and bypass God's intention. In the end, in all of these controversial questions, I think, the question that we have to keep coming back to is, how do we be faithful to God's intention? Because he's the one who got it all started, he's the creator. So that's kind of the basic answer. I don't know if that helps you to understand it, but that's the basic answer. The church is very conscious that not everyone sees things this way. It's certainly not condemnatory of other people who see things differently. And as far as the church is concerned, any child who comes into existence, no matter how they come into existence, is a child of God and loved by God and willed by God. So in holding this particular point of view, the church is not about condemning anything. It's simply saying if we're going to be faithful to the way God intended things to be, and you can read that in the way God created things, this is what we believe God is asking of us. I hope that kind of makes sense.
Hi, my name's Jamie Grove. I'm from Mater Dei College, and my question is, do you find it hard to say no to issues that secular society asks you to say yes to?
Is it hard to say no?
Yeah.
Yeah, very hard to say no. Because nobody likes to be always presented as negative. As I said to you when I was talking in the talk, and it may or may not happen this Easter, but as the Archbishop, I often get asked questions by the West Australian or Channel 7 or, looking for answers to all sorts of questions. And I'm always nervous. I always respond if I can, but I'm always nervous because I know that what's going to happen is that they're going to run a story, more likely than not, which will just add to people's impressions that all the church does is say no and is being negative. And often I'll offer a written reply which tries to explain our position, and just a tiny little bit will be taken out, and that's what appears in the paper or what have you. I'm not having a go at the media here, that's just the way it is. But, it would be so much easier, in one sense, if we could say yes, go for it, because then we wouldn't keep getting attacked and criticised and all the rest of it. So it is difficult, but it's a little bit like what I was saying in response to the previous question. In the end, as bishops, our job is to do our best to help the church remain faithful to what we think God is asking. And if that means we're going to cop a bit of flack in the press, well, that's just the way it is. Yeah. So does that answer the question? Or yeah, good on you. Do you want to add to that?
I think that text that the Archbishop gave us to think about from the letter to the Romans comes back, doesn't it? Having to give, in a sense, to the Holy Spirit that role of enlightening us in our thinking. Because sometimes the first reaction to a situation or a problem or a challenge in our society might seem to be the best and only solution. But on reflection, we and sometimes reflection, well, I think all the time, reflection requires us taking time just to think through the issues and look at the possibilities, look at the various options, but also to be reminded by the Holy Spirit of what is the truth. That needs to be really part of what we're meant to do. We're not meant to be just pulled along by what seems to be the only way that you can answer a challenge or an issue in our society today. We've got to be reflective, we've got to learn how to perhaps go back to what is essentially the truth, in the sense, what is it that God has revealed to us about his purpose in the creation and his plan and his call to us to become perfect. Perfect in the sense of not becoming this person who can never do anything wrong, but perfect in the sense that we achieve the goal that he has set for us in our lives, and that is to be one who is a child of God, one who represents, in a sense, through our life and our actions, that plan of God. People can see that plan at work in us. Does that make sense? Yeah, thank you.
Hey, my name is Adam and I'm from CBC Fremantle, and my question is there any programs instilled by the Catholic Church that try and like issues like domestic violence and promote the value of human dignity?
The short answer, pardon me, the short answer from me in terms of official agencies, like we don't have a Lifelink agency, for example, that deals directly with that issue and only that issue. Centre Care is a kind of a general social welfare, social outreach kind of agency that's part of the church here in Western Australia. And it has many, many programs to do with counselling of all different kinds and assistance to people in need. So Centre Care would have would often deal, I think, with the sort of situations you're talking about. It's not an agency that's dedicated just to that, but it is an agency where there is help available for people who are experiencing that kind of thing. I think too, some of the religious orders, I think the Josephite sisters, the sisters that Mary MacKillop founded, I think they might have, sometimes these religious orders have small programs where their sisters do local initiatives. So I think there's probably a few of those around, and other people even here in the room might be more aware of these things than I am. It's a big issue, obviously, and the thought of domestic violence is so contrary to what we as Christians believe human beings are supposed to, the way we're supposed to treat each other, that you're raising a good point. Maybe we should be looking much more seriously at a specific approach to this issue. It's a great question. Thanks.
I might just add to that, the Sisters' Place is in Fremantle, in the region of Fremantle, and it's as the Archbishop was saying, it's run by, I think it is, the Josephite sisters. And it's a place where women can go who have experienced violence and they can be cared for. When I was parish priest of Mirrabooka, we had another place there that was established by the Good Samaritan sisters, and it was a place where women could go and feel safe. And in that place then they'd also receive, I suppose, the counselling, but also the strategies that they needed to put in place in their life, which would help them to get out of those situations where violence could occur again. So it was really great to have something like that in the parish, knowing that it was a place where I could send women who I became aware of who'd been abused, that they would find a place where they could be really held very, very lovingly, and caringly. So, yeah.
Hello, my name is James Cavallo from Sacred Heart College, and first of all, I'd like to say that I personally think nowadays teenagers and adolescents are exposed to things on the internet which take them away from God, specifically sexual lust. And I was just wondering if what the church is doing to appeal sex before marriage as being a better option than what society tells us about lust. So I was just wondering if how you're making it better to teenagers. Appeal.
Maybe I could start by talking about a program that I've fully supported for many years now. It's called Loving for Life. And I'm not sure whether some of you actually have encountered this in your schools already, but there's a team of people who go into the schools and they really help everyone in that school community to start looking at these questions, particularly that question around how do we really respect the rights of everyone that we encounter, and how, in that sense, do men respect the rights of women, and the need for us then to, I think, look at this, these things, these emotions, these feelings that we have in us. How do we manage these things? And it's interesting when I talk to the people who go into our schools to do these programs, they're amazed at how the young people, because they'll ask them at the beginning, what is their attitude about a whole series of things, and how their thinking begins to change once they've been looking at some of the basics of what we talk about when it comes to human sexuality and that plan of God, if you like, if we go back to that plan of God that He has for us to live safely and lovingly and respectfully with one another.
Hi, my name's Holly and I'm from Mercedes College. I was just wondering, with so many charities doing so much good things in our communities and so many students wanting to support them, what should we make sure we focus on when supporting charities?
We have what we call the Big Four in the Catholic Church. So at the moment, during Lent, we're focused on Caritas and Project Compassion. A little bit later in the year, of course, we'll be focusing on LifeLink, and a little bit later on, we'll be focusing on the work of the missions in locally, nationally, and overseas. And I'm just struggling with the fourth one. The Vinnies. How could we forget the Vinnies? But they're the four that we are encouraging the schools to make as the priority four. And I know that in the schools you get so many others that come asking for support. So I guess the school has to make a decision, having committed to the four, what more can we do for the others? And maybe some of the issues that come to the school are very direct and very personal, because it might relate to maybe one of the parents in the school who's died of cancer. And so the school thinks, now what can we do to help in the battle against this particular form of cancer? So the school would have to then think now, okay, well, we might make that the fifth of our projects for the year, because it's a very special one to us. So I think if we can just keep that in mind, that we've got the Big Four, and the other ones, I guess, are really up to the school communities to sort of work out what they can do.
Hello, my name is Laura Crellin. I'm from Newman College and I'm a social justice captain. And our question is, in the Year of Youth, what spaces can we create to open leadership opportunities in our church?
I'm tempted to say I need to give that a bit more thought than I have up until now. When you say spaces to provide leadership opportunities, are you thinking of anything in particular? You can give me a little bit of a clue.
Just how individuals can express their voice and what their thoughts are, and how they can take leadership.
Yep. Look, I think because it is the Year of Youth, I think one thing that would be good for all of you who are here to go back to school, most of you have got staff with you as well, to go back and actually say to your principal or to your faith education leader or whoever it might be, when we were at Arranmore for the Lifelink thing, the bishops said that they were really keen in this Year of Youth to actually have a chance to hear the voices of young people about the church. Now, today's one way of doing that, but it also needs to happen, I think, more at the local level. So, in a sense, I don't want to put it back onto you, but put it back onto each school to say, is there a way we could organise within the school a kind of a listening session or an opportunity for people in the school to get together and share with each other their thoughts about the church and how young people might be more involved in the church and what young people could contribute to the church and what the difficulties young people are facing in relationship to their belonging to the church, and that can then perhaps be fed back through the Catholic Education Office or directly through our office in the city to us. So I'm really glad you've asked the question. I'm not sure whether the answer I'm giving you is where you were hoping we'd go, but I think it does give me a chance to say we really need to hear what you think, because how are we really going to understand? I mean, I've got my ideas about what might work, but I'm 64. So, we need you to tell us what works for you in the church, what's not working for you in the church, what you think might work for you in the church, and then we can feed that into our thinking on the broader scale about what the church is all about. So that would be one suggestion I would make, that maybe as part of today you go home and to this school and you think about, okay, how could we set something up? Many of you are the leaders in your schools, so how could we set something up where people have a chance to share their points of view? And some of them will be things that the bishops will think, oh gee, I was hoping they weren't going to say that. But that's fine, we need to hear those things as well. It's interesting, I don't want to make this too complicated, but I've talked about the Year of Youth and how important it is for us to hear the voices of young people. Later on in this year, in October, Pope Francis has called a meeting of the world's bishops. Now, not all of us are going. There's only, I think, 2 going from Australia, because there's about 5,000 bishops in the world, so they wouldn't all fit in the Vatican. But so it's a synod of bishops, a meeting of bishops, probably 300 or 400 of them, precisely on the question of young people and the church. Now, there has been a lot of consultation about that already. Maybe some of you have been a part of that. But it does show that the church wants to listen. But the other thing is that the Catholic Church in Australia has got permission from Pope Francis now to hold a big meeting in 2020 and 2021. It's called a plenary council. It's a great big name for basically a meeting of the bishops, but we're putting it in 2020, and this is only the beginning of 2018, so that we've got a chance to give anybody in the church, and that includes every young person, an opportunity to share with us what your hopes and dreams are for the church. So we're in a period in our history where we're actually trying, maybe better than we ever have before, to listen to you. Because, we don't think that the Holy Spirit only speaks to bishops. The Holy Spirit speaks to everybody. So we need to hear what you think the Holy Spirit is telling you about the church. So I guess the message I'd like to give is that we're really keen to hear. The reality is that Bishop Don and I are not going to have time to go to every school and do it individually. So I think schools are invited to find a way of letting young people share their views and then funneling them somehow or other to us. And maybe it's through the Catholic Education Office, maybe it's through our youth ministry people in Highgate. We can work out the ways of doing it. So That would be really
Archbishop,
good.
if I could,
Yes.
what we could, wearing my LifeLink hat and also your marketing manager's hat, we could establish a special link either through the Archdiocesan website or through our LifeLink website. We can discuss this later. We can have a special email address established, and you can correspond with all of the principals and the teachers and encourage the young people to have their say. They can submit their submissions electronically, either in writing, video messages, whatever they might wish to do from a school perspective. I'll then collate that for you, and we can present that to you so that both bishops have the collective wisdom of our young people to consider.
That'd be fantastic.
All right, we can have that up and running for the second term for sure.
Yep, that'd be terrific.
Okay.
Yep, well done. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Anika and I'm from Servite College. How can youths like us influence and continue to spread a positive message to young people who have negative thoughts about the church today? And what are some key aspects should we focus on when spreading a positive message about the church?
That's an excellent question, because it's going to be the subject of the catechesis I'm going to give just after Easter to the young people. So how do we go about actually doing evangelisation? How do we go about representing Christ to others in our words and in our deeds? I suppose the first thing that I would think of from my own experience was I have to come to know who Jesus is myself. And I have to come to understand why he came. And then I need to look at the response that I make to all of that, you know, and that helps me to understand who I am and what I stand for at the moment. What do I think at the moment? And having gone through that process, then learning how to listen, as we're trying to do now, through this couple of years leading up to the plenary council. How to learn how to listen to other people and not, in a sense, go to them with what we think is the right answer, but actually hear what are the issues that they have. And then maybe be able to propose a way of thinking through those things which is based on faith. But it's a long process to be made ready for this sort of work. You've already been involved in that process by going through a Catholic school and by being involved in social justice actions and those sorts of things that you have as communities. So you've been pondering, I'm sure, through doing those things, what's that plan of God for me and for the world and my place in the world and how I'm responding. As I said earlier, being perfect means actually fulfilling that task or that role that God has in mind for us, and to the best of our ability with the grace of God. And that way we can be an example of how to live that faith. And I suppose in a way that's probably the most powerful way that we can actually help others learn about Jesus, by them seeing in us the effect of his presence in our lives and what we do, what we think, what we say. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yep. Could I just quickly add too, I think you'd all know what a cliche is. There's a cliche that goes around a lot, certainly was around when I was younger, that says that the faith is caught, not taught. And what that's trying to really say is that you can talk all you like we're doing now, you can talk all you like about the faith, but unless people experience it somehow, it's probably not going to make much difference to anyone's lives. So one of the things about showing a positive face of the church or showing people that there's something worthwhile in the church will come from the fact that we've found it helpful, we like being a part of it, and that shows in the way we act. If you get a chance, hop onto the internet and just Google World Youth Day or Google Australian Catholic Youth Festival and have a look at some of the YouTube videos and all the rest of it, of the enthusiasm and the spirit of life that generates at those kinds of events. And that's what we're hoping to do here in Perth at the end of next year with the Youth Festival coming here to Perth. If being a Christian makes you miserable or makes you angry or drags you down, then there's something drastically wrong. And so one of the things that we could all do is think, what do I think this Christianity thing is really all about? It's supposed to be about making life better. And when people see that a Christian has more energy and more enthusiasm and loves life more precisely because they're a Christian, that's what makes Christianity appealing. And when people see that Christianity makes people miserable and makes people angry and makes people argumentative, that puts everybody off. So it's a way of gauging how our own understanding of Christianity is, and the more we understand that it brings people alive, and that shows in the way we behave, the more likely we are to attract people so that they can discover themselves the beauty of Christianity. So it's a lot to do with whether we've actually caught the spirit of Jesus ourselves or not. And I won't go through them now, but in the New Testament, in Paul's writings, there's a great long list of the qualities of someone. Those of you who can remember your confirmation, you would have studied all of this when you're getting ready for confirmation. A great long list of all the qualities that come as part of the work of the Spirit and all the qualities that show that the Spirit's not present. If you go and have a look at those, you'll get a sense of what Christianity's supposed to do for us, and if it's not doing it for us, then there's something wrong. So I suggest that that's an important thing too.
Good morning. I'm Sebastian from Asnot College, and my question to His Grace or His Lordship is that would you say that from a social justice perspective, our liberal capitalist economy has failed?
I would say that a liberal capitalist economy that's not informed by Christian values is bound to fail. Because a liberal capitalist economy which has as its primary focus profit and the increase in wealth and those sorts of things, without the humanizing influence of Christian values, is bound to just make people more self-centered and more selfish. But if it is infused with Christian values, then it is one of the ways in which society can progress. I know that's a bit of a theoretical answer, but I think that's how I would answer it. In and of itself, liberal capitalism, it's just a particular economic theory, if you like, or an economic program. And any economic program that's not infused with values that aren't self-centered values, I think is bound to fail. That's my answer, but Bishop Don, you might want to add to that.
Yes, so this takes me back to secondary. But it doesn't matter what the system is that a nation might adopt. So it could be a very socialistic system or an extremely capitalistic system. But both of them will fail the people of that nation if they're driven ideologically by, say in the case of socialism, this idea of a class war, class conflict all the time, and I think they're using another name for it now, class envy. And capitalism will fail too, because if it's purely focused on profit at the expense of people, that fails too. It fails the people of that nation. So, as the Archbishop has rightly said, and he's drawing from ideas that were presented to the world by Pope Leo XIII. So this is going right back to the 1890s, where he wrote a beautiful encyclical that began the Church's response, if you like, to what they at that time could see were the devastating effects of the Industrial Revolution and the way in which it had really created a sense of slavery for many of the workers. So it was where the church started to advocate for the workers, and in order to make a just society where people could expect to offer, if you like, the service of their energy and their intelligence in work, but be justly paid, and that sort of thing. So that was the beginning of this whole tradition of social Catholic justice, social teaching, I should say, that we've got. And it's great if you can tap into that through your studies, just to understand that each of these systems will be bankrupt, in a sense, without that core set of principles that come from the gospel, which is about respect and justice for all in the community. So, yeah.
Hello, my name is Gwyneth and I'm from Santa Maria College. My question is, why are women not able to become ordained priests?
This is another one of those questions that there's kind of a simple answer and then there's quite a complex answer. So I'll share with you what I think the basic simple answer is, and maybe I can give you some hints about the deep question which you might then have to investigate yourself. Really goes back in a sense to something I was trying to say in my talk, one of the things anyway, and that is, in the end, the job of the church, so that's all of us, but it sort of gets concentrated in the Pope and the bishops, really. The job of the church is to be faithful to what God wants of the church, faithful to what Jesus intended when he established the church. Now, up until about the 11th century, the church was basically, there was just the church. We didn't have all of the different churches that we have these days. Around the 10th century, there was a split between what we think of now as the Roman Catholic Church, that's like the Western Church, and the Eastern churches. And some of those Eastern churches either remained in communion with the Pope or have re-established communion with the Pope. So the Catholic Church now has Western churches, that's what most of us belong to, and then Eastern churches. Father Elias, I think, is he still here? There he is, can talk to us about one of the Eastern churches who are Catholics. Then in the 16th century, there was the Protestant Reformation, and then, so in the Western Church, there are a whole lot of new churches which gradually appeared: Anglicanism, Lutheranism, the Methodist Church, all of these different churches. And once disunity came into the church, each church went in its different way. And many of the churches have, since the 16th century, but really only in recent years, decided that women can also take these leadership roles in the church. But the Catholic Church, both in its Eastern and Western parts, and all of the Eastern churches, and that means the vast, vast majority of Christians in the world, have always understood, well, not because we don't always understand, they've always believed that it's God's will for the church that only men can take that particular role. So the simple answer, in a sense, is that what's happened is that through a lot of thinking and praying and discussing and discerning and reflecting and all of that, the leaders of the church, both in the Western world and in the Eastern world, have come to the conviction that it's God's will for his church that men only can be ordained to the priesthood or to become bishops. That then leads to the question, really, well, why? Why is that part of God's plan for the church? Because it also touches the question of why or how we think the church comes to understand what God wants for the church. And we were talking before about the plenary council, and we're wanting to listen to everybody's voices, and we do. And then the bishops will make decisions about the future of the church in Australia. But in making decisions, one of the key criteria for us will be, is this going to keep us faithful to what God wants for the church? So I'm going around it in a bit of a circle, but the point I'm wanting to make is that in our Catholic understanding, in the end, when there's a really difficult and complex question and it needs to be resolved, God has given to his church a way of resolving it, and that way ultimately is if the Pope and the bishops together reach a decision and they teach that formally as part of God's will for his church, then we can be confident it's God's will for his church. So the simple answer is only men are able to be ordained priests and bishops because the church believes very firmly that that's God's intention for the church. As I say, that then leads to the question of why. So that means you've got to then start thinking, now what role does the priest or the bishop play in the church? What's the specific role that the priest plays? And is there a way of appreciating that it's because of the particular role that the priest plays that only men can be priests? That leads you into, all of this deep discussion about what the priesthood is all about. And I won't go into it in too much detail because it's very complicated. And not everyone would agree with us. Just, what would it be, 2 or 3 weeks ago, maybe a bit longer, I went to the Anglican Cathedral for the installation of the new Anglican Archbishop of Perth, who's a woman, Archbishop Kay Goldsworthy. So the Anglican Church has taken a different perspective to the Catholic Church. But in the Catholic tradition, the main job of the priest or the bishop is to be a kind of a living, visible, obvious, practical sign that Jesus is still present in his church as the Good Shepherd of the church. So in the Catholic tradition, the priest is meant to be a clear imaging of the presence of Jesus at the heart of the church, and Jesus was the man. Now, a lot of people don't find that convincing, and I'm not pretending that it's a 100% convincing answer. The real answer is because the church has discerned that this is what God is asking of us, that the priesthood be reserved to men. When we try and understand, now why would that be that God's asked that of us, that's when we start to think of these other explanations. So I hope it's only the beginnings of a very long and complex answer. But in the end, in all of these difficult questions, the basic question the church has to answer is not what would we like in the church. It goes back a little bit to the question about how do the bishops feel about always having to say no all the time. It'd be so much easier for us if we could say, look, we misunderstood it, we got it all wrong, now we can change and we'll have women as priests and bishops as well. But we believe that would be to be unfaithful to what God wants for the church. Now our task is to try and understand what's God trying to tell us about the church by insisting that being a priest has to be reserved to men. Doesn't mean that women can't do lots and lots of other things in the church or that men are somehow better than women in the church, nothing like that. It's the specific role that a priest plays and that relationship to Jesus. So, okay, that's kind of where we're at the moment.
Hi, my name's Declan. I'm from Sacred Heart College. As you said before, that Catholicism should be about making your life better and such. I've got many friends who identify as homosexual and bisexual and stuff. One of my best mates is gay, and he has a very Catholic family, and he's depressed, he's anxious, he suffers from mental health issues and stuff because of that sort of fear that his parents won't even accept him for who he is, who he's born as. So how is it, we've been told that we should discern for ourselves what is good, right, perfect, etc. How is it justifiable that as a governmental law that we shouldn't be able to marry people of the same sex, even outside of being Catholic? How is that fair to people who are that way and they aren't even a part of that religion and yet are imposed upon that because of people in Australia that don't believe it?
Well, look, the first thing I'd say is that you're talking about a situation that actually isn't the case in Australia because of the change in the law. So in that sense, the Australian community has made a different decision to the community that the church might have thought would have been a better decision. Reminds me of something, and I don't know if any of you ever read I published a few things about this issue when it was a hot topic year or so ago. And in a couple of them, I reminded people that Pope Benedict, so Pope Francis's predecessor, but also Pope John Paul II, who was Pope Benedict's predecessor, and also Pope Francis now, often say it's the job of the church to propose things to the rest of society, in whatever society they happen to be, but never to impose anything. So what we tried to do in this big debate was to say, look, from the point of view of the Catholic Church and the Catholic Church's understanding of these things, we believe that it would be better to go down this path rather than that path. We didn't try and impose it on anybody, but like anybody else, the Church has a right to speak up and say, well, we think, from our point of view, this would be the better thing for our society to do. Other people spoke up and said, well, from our point of view, we think this would be a better thing. That's part of living in a democratic and multi-faith and multicultural society. So I don't think we should be too hard on the Church for proposing one alternative as one of the voices in the conversation. In the end, our voice didn't prevail, and that's the reality, and so we now have to move forward on the basis of that reality. So that's the first thing I'd say. The Church is often accused of trying to impose its values on everybody else, but you could say exactly the same thing about any pressure group, let's call them, who wanted to change things. I mean, why should people who believe in traditional marriage have this new thing imposed on them? So this language about imposing is a bit of a motive language which is perhaps a bit unfair. In a society like ours, any group that wants to has got a right to say, well, we think this might be a better way to go. That's the first thing I'd say. Second thing I'd say is that in the Catholic tradition, we draw a very sharp distinction between the fact that a person experiences same-sex attraction or lives with same-sex attraction, which is just a reality. And just like you, I've got lots of friends who are gay. So, that's the reality. And we all know that that's the reality. And that's the Church's teaching doesn't condemn same-sex attraction. What the Church does is say, and it goes back to things we were talking about earlier in response, I think, almost to the first question. The Church says, when we look at the world and the way God seems to have created the world, we come to the conviction that our human sexuality and our use of our human sexuality is actually tied very tightly to family and the creation of family and the creation of children. And so to deliberately engage in sexual activity that excludes the possibility of children and the creation of a family is actually to misuse God's gift of sexuality. And so whether we're talking about homosexual people or people who engage in sex but use contraception to make sure they never have any children, that sort of thing, that separating between sexuality and procreation, the giving rise to new life, we believe that that's not the way God created the world to be. And you look at the structure of men and women, both physically and psychologically and spiritually, and the idea of coming together in love, which leads to new life, seems to be at the heart of God's creation of humanity. So it's for all of those reasons that we take a particular view about any form of sexuality which deliberately separates sexual activity from the possibility of family. That's the sort of basic underlying principle. Then you think about all of the implications of that and what that means for people like your friend or people like my friends, and that's where, if you like, the rubber hits the road. It becomes very difficult. We use an old-fashioned word in the church. We use lots of old-fashioned words in the church. One of them is chastity. And chastity is all about, well, it's about lots of things, but it's about living our sexuality in harmony with God's intention. And that's not easy. People like Bishop Don and myself who have committed ourselves to living a life of celibacy, for example, for the sake of being available for the church, that's not easy either. But everybody's called to live their sexuality not just for the sake of themselves, but for the good of the wider society. So it's like the issue of women priests. There's the fundamental principles, and then there's all of the questions that swirl around it. But that would be very simply the answer that I would give. The thing about the church in this regard, though, is that in theory, now, what happens in a particular family, or what happens with a particular priest, or what happens in a particular parish or whatever, in theory, the church never condemns people, is open to everybody, but continues to hold up what it believes is the ideal to which God is asking us to live. And so whether people are same-sex attracted, whether they're gay or whether they're straight or whatever they might be, they should be able to find a home in the church. But we all need to know what God is calling us to, and we're all supposed to be working towards living that ideal. And that's going to be harder for some people than for others. So, yeah.
Excuse me, Archbishop, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to call an end to the questions because time's run on. We have one, is it a quick question? Okay, one last quick question, please.
Hello, my name is Ailma Khan from Clontarf Aboriginal College. I come from a small town called Robin back up north. A lot of people back home don't follow God or ask questions. So I would like to know, what is the Catholic Church doing to engage Aboriginal people in WA?
What's the church doing to engage with Aboriginal people?
Good, it's a good question because, as you know, in the Kimberleys, the church has been very much part of the people's life there. I remember going up to Beagle Bay and then up to Lombardina about 2 years ago, and I was just so impressed by the way in which the community there is so very strong. Has its problems, of course, but like every community, not just in the Kimberleys, but has really a very strong relationship, it seemed to me, with the priest, with the local community of the parish. The work of the Aboriginal Catholic ministry here in Perth is something that I've been very closely following, and I suppose it's like the things that we've been saying earlier. The people that the ACM ministers to experience from them the care and the love of Christ, basically. So the sorts of things that they do is visit in the hospitals. So there are a lot of people from the Kimberleys who come down to Perth, and they feel very anxious about being here, the older people, and they often have to spend maybe 2 or 3 weeks in hospital. So they feel very lonely and they feel very separated, I think, from their own people. So the ministry of the Archdiocese through the ACM in visiting them and helping them, providing them with just simple things that they need while they're staying in hospital, is a really clear sign to them that somebody cares about them, and someone is prepared to do even the simplest and caring thing for them. So I think that's the sort of spirit that around Western Australia anyway we find. We have these ACMs in each of the dioceses, and that is the way in which the local church then reaches out and tries to provide for the needs of the local communities.